Welcome to Speaking to Speakers, the podcast that brings together business leaders, coaches, keynote presenters, actors, voiceover talent, and anyone else who uses words and their voice to make their living. I'm Robert Mattson. Let's hear what they have to say. Hello, welcome to the podcast. Today we are fortunate enough to have Jon Selig with us today. Hey, Jon, thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Jon, you help salespeople craft and use humor to have better conversation. So you teach humor to salespeople. How the hell did that happen?
That is the $1 million question that I get asked several times a day. Well, I was in technology sales for about 12 years. I worked in the Oracle world as well as some SaaS companies, and my 12 years in sales was really just a well-paid internship for my career in a lot of unpaid stand-up comedy. And I was hitting comedy stages pretty hard, never with the intention of trying to get a Netflix special, but it just became my new sport. My knees gave out at a certain point, so I had to put basketball down, and I needed something to challenge myself. And I just loved doing comedy. It was something that I was always interested in, but sort of fell into it by accident. That's a whole separate story. Or discovering that I really loved the art of stand-up. And then I realized, you know what? I learned a lot of these skills, mainly handling rejection, which is a big part of stand-up, as we all know,
Sure.
from my time in cold calling and sales itself. Part of my passion was not just comedy. My true passion was never selling software again. And I wanted to find out a way that I could live that passion. So I put together a comedy writing for salespeople, training and workshop, and taking really what I know about sales, how to deliver an effective message, and also reframe it in a way that helps sales reps show that empathy, that they understand the customer's problems, and evoke some laughter so that they're liked and they command more attention.
I think, Jon, when you talk about those 12 years of time you spent in the coal mines, as it were, of sales, that gives you the credibility you really need, because bringing that such a concept of humor to salespeople can be difficult. Some salespeople have kind of that fighter pilot mentality. They've seen it, they've done it all, they don't need anything new. And humor, what are you kidding me? But because you've been in their shoes, that might be something they can accept a little more easily.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I have advice to give, or I have something to offer. If someone's crushing their goals and hitting all their numbers, I'm not going to tell them that I have a new way to take them to the next level. They're obviously doing all kinds of things that perhaps I never thought of. However, definitely loads of younger sales reps who don't know how to connect with perhaps their older prospects. Maybe there's some sales reps in the middle of their career who really have been doing things a certain way. Maybe they shifted from one type of sales role to another, and they need some new tactics, new approaches. And humor is a great way to kick off more conversations, by showing empathy. So, the concept I like to preach is ultimately roast your prospect's pain, so that you can show your prospect, look, I know you suffer from this challenge, and this is why it's such an awful challenge. And if they laugh, they're going to say it's funny because it's true. We struggle with this all the time. So humor is a great way to kickstart conversations. And if you don't know, if you're not good at kickstarting conversations, it's a great way to open them up. And it can be a great way to diffuse tension in other situations and just at the same time make yourself more likable. So to your point, if you're a veteran sales rep, crushing your numbers, and you don't have a funny bone in your body, you don't need to listen to me. But if you're, one of God knows how many other sales reps out there looking for a new tool for their utility belt, I'm more than happy to help.
Yeah, because you never know when last year's Superstar and President's Club attendee is having a tough year, and they need just that different approach that can work. So is there a criteria for when to use humor in sales, and can you use it too early or too late?
Well, it depends on your role, I guess. I mean, if you're kind of on the sales development, top of funnel side of things, I mean, you got to get attention real early, because everyone is trying to contact your prospect, whether it's through cold calls, whether it's through cold email, social selling, and there's just so much noise out there that you got to cut through it and rise to the top. And you got to separate yourself from everyone else. So if you can make your prospect laugh and get their attention, but say something meaningful and relevant to them, not just make a joke about perhaps what happened at the Oscars the other night or the weather. These are throwaway jokes. They're frivolous. It shows you have a good personality, but it doesn't show you can really bring value to the table. So if you can demonstrate that you understand the prospect's world and challenges through a joke, they're gonna take note of you. They're gonna say, hey, this person gets me. And at the same time, if you made them laugh, you're capturing their attention. So right out of the gate, I think that early on, for people who are trying to build pipeline, humor is such an effective weapon. That said, at the beginning of a let's say a discovery call, or maybe a demonstration for those in the software world, or even a sales meeting, if you can establish that you're likable early on, they're going to want to listen to you. I like to liken the use of humor early on to the way masters of ceremonies or hosts are in stand-up comedy, at least in Canada. I think in Canada, where I live, the MC at a comedy show has a different role than in America. You know,
Well,
in Canada,
what's different?
yeah, I've noticed a lot from my time doing stand-up is that in Canada, the MC, their job is to warm up the crowd by bringing them together, making them feel comfortable, getting them to react a little bit, getting them to clap, and make them realize this is a comedy show you're about to watch, sort of setting the table for all the other comedians. When I go to the States and I watch comedy, the MC is basically a 10-minute, he's just doing an act for 10 minutes, just doing jokes. Whereas in Canada, we do a lot of crowd work. We make it interactive. We try to get the crowd settle down because sometimes they want to jump in. Regardless, the MC's role, the role of the MC in Canada is not to be the most hilarious person on the show. Their job is to get the crowd to like them and to respect them and to make them say, hey, we're so glad you're here. We have a great show lined up. Using humor, if you're a sales rep, very early on in your sales efforts, in your discovery calls, whatever it is, your goal is to just get them to like you using it. They don't have to think you're hilarious. They don't have to double over laughing. Your job is not to be a stand-up comedian, but it's to get them to listen to you and to develop that relationship. And if you can just show that you're a laid-back person who's not even thinking only about business, but you want to give them a good time, you're entertaining a little bit, even if a joke doesn't go well, I think people can respect that, unless it's just a terrible, inappropriate joke, which is not something I ever preach to deliver.
I've learned two things from that, John. One, that Canadians are superior to Americans, apparently, when it comes to comedy. And secondly, when you are up there, you are an MC, because if you, especially in high-tech sales, which was your background, actually was my background is high-tech marketing, is that you're usually up there and you might have a demo person, you might have a project manager or a product manager along with you, and you are emceeing that event, just like the MC at these Canadian comedy clubs.
Well, first off, the only thing Canadians are superior to Americans at is freezing. We're much better at it than you. Digging our way out of huge snowfalls. We seem to have a better handle on clearing the roads when it snows. That is where we claim superiority. But you nailed it, actually. When you're in high tech sales, enterprise sales, there is always someone who's really demonstrating the expertise of the industry, the business problem they're facing, and the software itself. And yeah, my job was to kind of be the MC, warm up the customer, show that, hey, listen, I'm the friendly face, and make them sort of assure them that the person I've lined up for to show them how the software works is really going to be able to handle their issues, and they're going to have a great time if they buy their software, not just for tonight, but for every day and night moving forward. So that's a good analogy you just made. I like that.
You're welcome. But are salespeople afraid to use humor? And if they are, why are they?
I think some people don't have confidence in their own sense of humor. You know, that they feel like they don't want to upset an apple cart. Maybe they were taught that there was no room for humor in business. Business is serious, and that just comes from where they come from. It depends who raised you, where you went to school, the other business environments you worked in. But there's definitely a handful of people out there afraid to use it. That said, sales is really, at the end of the day, a role where you have to deal with people. And it's so corny, it's so cliche, but people buy from people, and people want to buy from people they like and trust. And if you can make them laugh a little bit, you're just going to build a stronger relationship with them, and they won't have a wall up. So I understand that people can be afraid to use it if they're not used to being personal, but maybe if they're not used to being personable, maybe sales isn't the right career for them.
So if I could quote, I want to quote someone here, the great Jon Selig. I heard him say pretty recently, actually, that as long as your joke has a reason, a purpose, then it's okay. If you're throwing off those frivolous one-liners, then that's not adding a lot of value. But if you were giving someone an interesting way of looking at something, the great Jon Selig told me once that is the reason that people should tell jokes.
Yeah, listen, like the great Jon Selig once said, I think you can use frivolous jokes, but your time with that prospect is limited. And they're not paying you to come in and tell a bunch of jokes. So if you are going to play the I'm a funny person tool, make them laugh and demonstrate some, deliver some value through the joke. Talk about a common problem that maybe that prospect and all their competition is dealing with, and that ultimately you have the solution for it. It's a good segue. It's like funny, you laugh at that, but just so happens we're here today because I'm going to talk to you about how we can get rid of that hilarious pain that you're struggling with every day.
So are there safe topics for jokes, or at least safer topics for humor?
Well, like I said, I think if you stick to business issues, you're just going to maintain a ton of credibility as a subject matter expert. You have no chance of offending them. The worst that'll happen is maybe they don't laugh at your joke because you delivered it flatly. There's loads of things we don't want to talk about, and I think everyone can use their good judgment. Obviously, we never want to make a joke that involves sex, religion, politics, anyone's orientation, anyone's cultural background. Very common sense. I mean, you never know who your audience is.
Mm-hmm.
It's important we know our audience, because if we know our audience, there's a good chance we won't offend them. We understand who they are. We understand what buttons to not push. And if we understand which buttons we should be pushing, we can craft some humor that we can use in a repeatable fashion that drives more conversations and more likability.
One thing, I have a 13-year-old who's dying to be the funniest 13-year-old in the room. And one thing I tell him, don't laugh at your own jokes, Sam. Just don't assume that they're funny. Let them laugh at your joke, because they'll tell you if it's amusing. And if you laugh at your own joke and then they don't, then you're in that awkward moment. But if you throw something out there and then they laugh and you don't, it's usually
and you're teaching your son a good thing, which is self-awareness. And it's important for every sales rep to have a little bit of self-awareness, understand what they're good at, what they're not good at. When I write jokes and I go on stage and I deliver new jokes, it might not get laughs the first time,
mm-hmm.
but it doesn't mean I quit on the joke. I record myself, I go listen to it, I'll come back, I'll rehearse it, I'll iterate it, I'll edit it, and I'll deliver it again. And if it starts to get some chuckles, probably the joke isn't there yet, but I've improved upon my results from last time. And, your 13-year-old son just really has to watch the reactions of people to know if a particular joke is funny. And, I've told jokes to people that I find funny, and I've watched them not smile several times, and I just punt it from my repertoire, either in a personal context, selling context, or of course a stand-up comedy context. Because if I kept all those jokes that I found super funny in my stand-up act, people would be staring at me with strange looks for about 15 minutes at a time.
That's true. If they repeatedly fail, probably not a good joke. But sometimes you have the right joke, just the wrong audience.
Yeah, but that's where relatability comes into using humor in sales. Obviously, we need to, like I said, we need to understand our prospect, who the buyer is, what their persona is, what's bothering them, and tap into those things. Obviously, if you're selling manufacturing equipment, you don't want to make a joke that only a retailer will understand, no matter how good a joke is. I watch a lot of open mic comedy because I'm around it quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And something I like to share a bit in my training and workshop. What can you learn from stand-up comedians? What can salespeople learn from stand-up comedians? And I've broken it down into both the bad stand-up comics and the good ones. And I saw some guy in San Diego. He was dressed up in a suit. He was very smart. He was very clever. He was young. His jokes were actually quite good. The only problem is they all involved really obscure pop culture references from the late 90s. And the audience was just staring at him. Like, he was trying to show, like, I'm really hip. I really know cool stuff from all different eras. But they weren't buying his jokes because it wasn't relatable at all. Like, not that many people at this point can get a joke about pulp or suede.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of that Dennis Miller approach, where Dennis is the smartest guy in the room and his humor is usually very, very intellectual. And sometimes Correct. You're just sitting there going, I'm sorry, Dennis, I didn't read that book from 1823, and I don't get that reference at all.
And that's what social media is for. Social media is all about finding your audience who appreciates what you do, building your audience. But when we're face to face with people, I mean, we got to be aware of the fact that they might not have watched that same movie or listened to that same deep cut album from the 70s that you did.
Oh, absolutely. What do you say when you're working with salespeople, executives, or all the different types of people you work with, and they tell you, yeah, I'm just not funny. That's not my style.
A couple of things. The first thing I would say to that is I think everyone can get a little funnier. If someone ever laughs at a joke, has repeated a joke they heard on TV, has said something funny in the moment that just got a laugh, or who just, like I said, I might have said this already, but just laughs at jokes that they hear. They have a sense of humor. They understand why something is funny. To me, that means they're capable of delivering a joke that maybe they didn't write, but they can deliver a joke. and they could use it for impact as part of their sales script. That said, if someone's successful in sales and they have a style that works for them, by no means am I preaching that they change it up for the sake of changing it up. If they're doing well, stay the course. And for those who are looking for something new and do have a sense of humor, humor is a way to perhaps boost your confidence and build more bridges with your prospects.
And I think what I see for comedy, I mean, everything has a structure. I mean, there's certain structures in comedy which are age old. There's, the rule of three: set up, punchline. So you set up the structure and then you hit the punchline. Or if someone's walking across an ice rink and slips and falls, not really funny. If someone's walking off a ballroom that has recently been waxed, it's a little Buster Keaton, but that has historically been more humorous than it's unexpected. If you learn how to see some of the things, why other things are funny, I think that helps you figure out what's funny for yourself.
Yeah, that's the one thing I don't claim to teach people is being able to see funny in certain circumstances. I do believe that some people, like I said, I do believe everyone can be trained to see a little bit of funny. And I think that comes down to who you hang out with, some of your own life circumstances, how much comedy you actually choose to watch or listen to in your spare time. Because I think people can get funnier if they put their mind to it, if they work at it, if they express themselves. And of course, I left this out of my previous answer, practice it a little bit. So just because you deliver a joke the first time and it doesn't hit, and if your prospect doesn't laugh, try it again, because it takes time to develop that confidence and timing to nail a joke. But we should innately be able to understand why something is funny. If we want to say it in the first place, we know it's funny and we want to try it. No one's trying jokes they think aren't funny, right? So if there's a joke that, for example, you believe is really funny and you deliver to your prospect and it fails, all right, you still think it's funny probably, but it just figures that you just need to figure out how can I deliver it so that it receives a bit more of an impact next time.
That's a great point, Jon, because there is building a funny joke and then there's delivering a funny joke, which are two very separate skill sets. That's why you have some people who are great comedy writers, but not great people on stage. And you have people who are vice versa that need a great writer behind them. And then they get on stage and they can kill it with nearly anything.
Well, absolutely. And I always said, look, I used to sell data warehousing solutions to CIOs who were seeking robust reporting and analytics.
Now that's funny. I mean, that's just funny by nature.
Well, that's it. It's hilarious, but it's hilarious because someone actually paid me to do that for a living. And I had no clue what I was talking about. Now, the point of that is I was selling solutions to people whose jobs I never had in industries I've never worked in, and I had never used this software. So, I learned how to deliver the messaging to do my job. I learned all the right buttons to push with my prospects. And it took practice, and it took listening to other people have that conversation with prospects. I'd listen in on my boss having that conversation with prospect. I'd pick up, I'd take things away. And jokes are much the same way. We can repeat other people's timing and delivery. And in sales, I'm not professing that everyone has to write a 10-minute stand-up act to deliver to their prospects. I'm telling you about the power of one good joke that's extremely relatable to prospects that they could learn how to deliver through some practice.
All right, fantastic segue. So, Jon, I'm going to ask you, without giving away your whole workshop, can you share one technique with the listeners that could just get them started?
I think the biggest gap that every salesperson, most anyway, are struggling with is just being able to express themselves in their own words. And I think, forget expressing yourself in your own words, just expressing themselves. There's a lost art called writing and journalizing. And I think a lot of people, if they want to start, they should take a fresh sheet of paper, maybe 3 if they can do it, and just pick a particular topic that ultimately they want to impress upon their prospects and write everything down about it. Why it's frustrating to the prospect, why it's a challenge, how it impacts their business, who is being affected by it. If they can write down all these things and just go as long as they can and write as much as they can, even if some of it isn't tied to exactly the questions they're trying to, that I just put forth, just keep writing. Just get everything on paper. That's a great starting point, because that allows people to put some thought behind things, ultimately, so they can sift through it and figure out what's going to resonate with my prospect when the time comes where I learn how to structure a joke.
Now that's a great point. I think to your early comment about roasting their pain, you have to first know their pain, document it, find the little bits of pain that will make a great piece of humor, And without doing that homework, you'll never build the foundation you need to get to the roasting their pain and making it funny.
Yeah, because jokes usually are predicated upon stereotypes and assumptions,
Mm-hmm.
and to craft the right joke, you sort of need to figure out what are the best assumptions and stereotypes about a particular problem,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of bake that into the final result. But you can't just get to the punchline quickly without giving it some thought. And of course, we think about things quite often, but those thoughts escape us. If you get it down on paper, it's not only allowing you to put things into your own words versus flowery language that marketing and sales enablement provide you. It allows you just to keep going deep and giving it some thought to the next level, giving it some next level thought, I should say, that will allow you to ultimately have more to say to your prospect in your own words, making you a little bit more human. So even if you don't come up with a great joke out of it all, you're just training yourself to become more conversational.
Yeah, that's a great point. And as you're saying that, what ran through my mind is I've heard people, comedians, stand-ups that use stereotypes, and it's a little bit old. It's trite. I've heard it before. It's the ones that I always laugh hardest, I think, the people who pick out the stereotype right before it's a stereotype. So they see that pattern that you didn't realize was a stereotype quite yet. But then the minute they mention it to you, it's like, oh my God, you're right. You're absolutely right. That is something that is so prevalent that it carries the weight of a stereotype, but still gives me that new twist on it. And those are the people I think I laughed hardest at.
Yeah, and I'm not talking about becoming a hack.
No, I wasn't meant to imply that, John. I was just building on something that you said that struck a chord in my mind.
No, absolutely. But I think, and I understand that, and I guess we're saying the same thing, that ultimately, if you can generalize something about what the prospect is dealing with,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, in their world, there's a stereotype, but and they've just never heard it positioned that way to them.
That's a good way of looking at it. That's much clearer.
Exactly. Yeah, these are micro audiences, right? Our prospects are really micro audiences for humor.
Yeah, it might be it's a one-on-one because you might be over the phone if you're an SDR or a BDR, a sales development or business development rep, and you're on the phone with somebody. Humor is a great tool. If you're doing an enterprise sales call, we've got a room of a dozen people in a boardroom. And so they're all different approaches, but humor, if you do it right, I think can carry across all of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think for inside reps, their voices and their words are really the only thing that can differentiate them from their prospects. Unless you're doing a Zoom call where there's some body language involved, but we're not in the room with them. I think the vast majority of sales calls still are just voice. So your tone and your sense of humor can really separate you from your prospects. And I mean, I did no shortage of in-person presentations to some executives who were what's the word for it? Rumpled, I think is the word I'm going to use. Sort of a little
with highly underused word in corporate America, rumpled. Yes,
and furrowed brows. I mean, these were kind of executives who sometimes worked in a manufacturing plant, let's say on the outskirts of Toronto. I'd have to go visit them, and because I was being told, I was there because procurement told those guys, you need to speak to 3 vendors. And very often I was they didn't really want to buy Oracle, but they had to speak with me. And I'd walk in the room and their arms were folded because they didn't want to be there. They have other things to do, but they're forced to be there. So humor allowed me to connect with them, relate to them, and I'd see them unfold their arms and sit up straight in their chairs and at least take the time to listen and show a little respect.
So John, this has been great, by the way. I really appreciate the time. Let's close with something a little bit more fun. What is one of the funniest or maybe favorite things that has come out of one of your workshops?
I do things like sales meetings and kickoffs and QBRs. And we have good workshops where we're going a little deep with the joke writing process. It's kind of like a sales training and comedy writing workshop all put together. And one of my clients is Zoho Corporation, the CRM people. And they've been shipping me around for these road shows where myself and there's been another speaker, and people just come out, there's food, there's drink, and in 90 minutes, I deliver a very abridged version of my workshop to many different sales teams. And it's hard to write a good joke in 90 minutes. It's really just 45 because I'm speaking for about half of that, and I'm guiding through a process. But there was a team from a company called, I had a client they're named Event Mobi. They do conference They do apps for conferences.
Mm-hmm.
And, part of what I get my sales teams to write jokes about are consequences of pain. So these guys, they're calling up event planners. They're basically trying to get them to, use an app versus printing out loads of agendas for the conference. So they wrote this joke where they said, speak with a lot of conference planners, and they all tell me that their biggest challenge is printing loads of agendas. But an even bigger challenge is finding a recycling bin big enough to put them in when it's over. Big laughs, big laughs. But there was one group who came to a Zoho CRM networking event, and they wrote a joke in just 45 minutes that killed. I don't remember the joke, but the guy just got up there and he put the pieces together really quickly, and he just nailed it. And for me, that was actually one of my favorite things, because some people do take to humor a little quicker, and you just sort of need to show them the tools and how to do it. And a lot of people never think about this kind of stuff. So I was happy to turn on some lights at one of my Zoho CRM networking learning events.
So hopefully, Jon, you'll be turning on some lights for some of the people listening here today. So I'd like to thank Jon for his time. Jon is up there in Montreal. And if you'd like to learn more about Jon, you can go to jonselig.com, which is JONSELIG.com. He is half sales guy, half stand-up comic, and all parental disappointment. Jon, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you for having me. Had a great time.
Thanks for listening. Speaking to Speakers is sponsored by ITM Speakers, helping executives, sales staff, and subject matter experts become more effective and persuasive communicators. Learn more at itmspeakers.com.